London calling YouTube, London calling everyone, and in this week of the Red Moon, prophesied by Scripture, I gather, I think the world is supposed to have ended by now. So, Gunderson, how was your apocalypse?
It were a right good un, lad.
Hey, and Vil, how was the apocalypse for you?
The Jedi's attempt on my life has left me scarred and deformed, but my resolve has never been stronger.
Excellent. Okay. Well, good to know that you're up for the show, despite having been in the by the sounds of it. Okay, so next up we have, I'll say quite a tricky topic, which I'm going, as someone from outside the UK, reporting introducing quite a difficult topic. I'm going to try and say it in a nutshell. Forgive me if I stumble. What essentially has happened is that a rancher in the United States with the surname Bundy, I can never say his first name, has I've heard two versions of this, because one was that it was some kind of conservation thing, that his cattle were threatening some kind of turtle in the area, and somebody else has said, no, it's not about that. That he actually, his cattle were grazing on federal land, and he hasn't paid the grazing tax since 1998, which would be 15 years, and apparently that's amassed something like $1 million worth of tax. He apparently is on the record as saying he doesn't acknowledge the US government exists. When the feds tried to go in, protesters came, lots of people stood by this Bundy guy, and I think was it the chief police officer in charge said something like, I hope those protesters have made funeral arrangements, which is a very stupid thing to say. And
if he wants an American revolution, let him keep running his mouth.
Basically, I do think it's a very stupid way to deal with protesters, apart from anything else. I'll say I'm not American, but there's the First Amendment, and they were exercising their First Amendment rights. Some people are making this also about the Second Amendment, because these people are packing heat, and the feds actually did back down and give the guy his cattle back to avoid any kind of bloodshed. And now, I must admit, when I first heard this story, the way that it was presented, I was thinking the guy's defending his livelihood. I think someone also said there's something like there's oil under the farm, and that's what they're really after. Yep. You do wonder why they put up with it since 1998.
Hey, now let's give our government here in America a little bit of credit. At least we also do it to our own.
So at first I thought, okay, he's protecting his livelihood in a difficult economy, and these people do see the state or the government as the enemy, and it obviously wasn't handled very well. We have to say, some of the people who've come out in support of Bundy don't seem like the best kinds of people. You've got a former sheriff said something like what they should have done was use their women, their wives, their daughters as human shields, because if it were televised that the feds were shooting their women, then that would cause a revolution overnight. We've had people saying things like that about this story. Now, I do want to try and be balanced here, but the way I'm seeing it is, I know some people are seeing him as a hero and standing his ground and just protecting his livelihood, and that's what the Second Amendment's all about. But the fact of the matter is, he says he doesn't acknowledge the existence of the government of the country he's in, and he's owing $1 million worth of tax, where I don't know anything about this tax, if it's exorbitant or whatever, but ultimately, if it is public grass that his cattle are grazing on, and I'll say I know that my steaks don't come from the steak fairy, and I'm glad they're free range, but ultimately, he must have known he was meant to pay that tax, and so I'll tell you what, I'm going to go reverse alphabetically this time, because I know that Vil has a lot to say. Some people are trying to embrace this guy as a hero. I'm having apart from the fact that I see it as a huge concern that they won, because that could set a very bad precedent.
Well, that's the whole thing. He didn't really win yet. One thing I don't know if you're familiar with
Sheriff Mack, he used to be a sheriff in Arizona. He was the one there who defeated the Brady Bill. And he has a lot of insiders in the federal government, and he's been pointing out, and time and again, he says, they didn't back down as much as people think. They wanted to appease the protesters and get them out of there because they are planning a raid, and yeah, people are probably going to die. But the other thing, as far as what he's saying, I don't know if he actually said that he doesn't believe in the legitimacy of the entire federal government, or if he was talking specifically about the Bureau of Land Management, but it is worth noting that the Bureau of Land Management is actually a subcorporation of United States Incorporated, which is actually a private foreign-owned offshore company that's operated since 1952 out of Puerto Rico. It's separate. It's really weird politics, but you have the United States federal government, and you also have the You also have I don't know why I said Constitution. You also have the corporation, which is called the United States. And no one in the right mind would recognize the Bureau of Land Management as being a lawful governing power, because it's not. And if you look at the history of the American West, they have not been against conservation, which is what a lot of people have loved to say, but they have been against people out east who've never even come out west, who don't know the environment there, setting down a bunch of environmental laws that don't work. And this has been an ongoing problem facing a lot of the ranchers out there. Why haven't they gone after him over taxes before? Probably because he could win in court that those are not lawful taxes. That's my guess. I'm not saying that as a fact, but I'm saying that based on what bits of information that I do have. I honestly believe, and if evidence shows that I'm wrong, I'd be willing to acknowledge this, but I believe, based on what I know, that the real reason that they're now making a big stink is because they did find out that there's oil down there. But ultimately, this comes right down to the fact that our government has been really shutting down a lot of these ranchers. And who owns our government? Come on, everyone knows corporations run our government. That's what fascism is about, is big government and big business working hand in hand. It's not capitalism, it's fascism. And you have these big factory farms coming in here that don't want the competition and who could get much more land to build more factory farms if they didn't have the competition. So I think that what's really going on here is a bunch of greedy big business is trying to push this guy out, and he's certainly not the only one on the list. The very few ranchers that are left are all on that list.
Right. Okay. Quite an insight there, because I didn't know quite what the big picture is there. So, Gunderson, do you have anything to add?
I don't think I probably don't know enough about this issue to really comment much on it. But I would say I agree that if he was given that land on the agreement, or given that land to graze cattle on the agreement that he pays these taxes, then if he doesn't then do that, then I don't see what's wrong with the federal government saying, yeah, okay, stop taking the piss and just, pay this money that you owe us. And the thing is, why are they doing it now? Well, I mean, the thing is, I don't know, maybe there are ulterior motives, but the point is, they are saying it now, stop, pay these taxes that you've been dodging for the past 16 years.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if he could contest them in court, well, good luck to him. Why didn't he try to contest go through legal means if he felt that the taxes were unjust? And ultimately, if this is still an ongoing story, which I hadn't understood, I hope no one's hurt. But if the precedent becomes that you can say, I'm not paying tax, and then you win because you're packing heat, that's the end of the rule of law in America. And do people really want a revolution? Because I'll say that I think this is a genuinely worrying story if if people do back down, which doesn't mean I want a raid and for people to be shot dead.
Well, an interesting thing on that, you definitely hit some very good points. However, taxation is supposed to come through due representation. So what I think should happen is if he should take this to court, absolutely. And if they can determine that this tax is coming from this corporate entity and is not through due and proper representation, then it should be thrown out on its ears. He doesn't owe a damn thing. If he does, in fact, fairly owe a tax, and this is determined through the court, you know what? They work with people who have nothing that owe insane amounts in taxes all of the time. Here you've got a guy who's making quite a bit of money and whose particular livelihood feeds a lot of people. There is certainly no reason not to work with him if he'd be willing to pay it. But first we do have to determine if the tax is lawfully owned, and because I don't have more details than what I've given you, I'm not going to say yes it is or no it's not. However, I definitely think that this whole raiding of his land, the theft of his property, is not the right way for our government to go about it. So I do agree with the people that came armed and ready to fight. That doesn't mean that I necessarily want us to go straight to that avenue, but if they're not willing to say, okay, we need to take a closer look at this issue, then so be it.
Yeah, that's the thing I was about to say. I find it very troubling that their first response was to grab their guns and just gather around him and be like, and say, okay, we're going to have a standoff if you try and do this. That is actually the most troubling thing about this story, to be honest. As well as what Alex said, it sets a very bad precedent that, if we kick up enough of a fuss about it, and if we've got guns, then okay, we're going to back down. So yeah, it sets a very bad precedent. I think it's a very petty, childish response to just go in with the "you ain't taking my land."
See, each side in this should have gone through legal process. Can't you take someone to court for not paying their tax, or did he refuse to attend? I mean, because obviously they've been heavy-handed as well. You've got a threat to kill the protesters when you know they've got guns and you know they're standing their ground, which was pretty stupid. I mean, Vil, I remember you saying something like that was like a declaration of war that kind of said we're made the guy. Was it the chief of police in the area?
Actually, it was a commissioner, if I recall what I read correctly, and I'm not looking at it right now. But I'm just going to say off of the top of my head that I believe it was commissioner. And yes, regardless of whether Bundy is right or wrong, when a guy gets up here and basically declares, yeah, well, we're going to kill these protesters, or these protesters deserve to die, as far as I'm concerned, that elected official is guilty of treason, and he himself should be hanged for treason. As far as I'm concerned, that guy is an enemy combatant of the United States, of the citizens of the United States. And I know that sounds like a very radical thing to say, but I have law to back it up.
Well, the U.S., when was the last time somebody was executed in the U.S. for treason?
I would have to look that one up. I don't know the answer. I do know that treason is actually an executionable crime. Mind you, one should also note that treason is a very specific thing. Sedition is not considered treason.
Right.
However, actually taking a military action against the people of the United States is treason. Taking it against the government is not, if the government is acting in a way that is unconstitutional. We actually have a constitutional right and responsibility to overthrow them if they ignore our constitutional rights. And on that, just to explain a little bit, and a lot of Americans don't understand this too, our Constitution doesn't actually give the American citizens a single solitary right whatsoever. If you look at the language of the Constitution, it acknowledges that certain rights are universal and not just to American citizens, and that the government is not allowed to take those rights away. So when the government acts in such a way that violates those rights, it in fact goes against its very governing doctrine, its very own governing doctrine. That paperwork is nothing more than a set of limitations for the government, because it has a very clearly defined purpose. And our federal government has already been acting well outside of it, but that doesn't mean, we should go pick up arms and fight it. But if the government starts doing things like stripping you of your arms, stripping you of what you're allowed to say, removing the freedom of the press, all of which is happening in this country right now, if they can't be stopped, it may get to the point where that becomes the only option. This is a small piece of a much bigger problem in this country of corrupt bureaucrats wanting more and more power and not caring what rights they strip from us. I'm not saying that Bundy's right or wrong, as we've already gone over that, but clearly the government could have handled this in a much more responsible way than snatching up his property and causing a big stink. And with the protesters, the fact that they did not fire a shot, I think that they did the right thing. They were there if it was needed, and had they fired first, I would have been against that. But I think that they actually did handle it responsibly, and hopefully now cooler heads will prevail and this will be handled in the courts where it should.
Yeah. Okay, Gunderson?
I'm just going to say I think it needs to progress well beyond this point in order to justify taking up arms against the government. Like, well beyond just trying to confiscate some random bloke's land from him, whether or not he was in fact evading taxes. I think this is certainly too small an issue to start a gunfight over.
Well, Vil was saying he'd be against them if they fired the first.
Even then, I still don't support retaliating.
I think each side in this went straight into macho posturing when, it should have been handled in the courts to begin with. So it's not maybe not the best response from the protesters, but not the best. Don't open it with threatening the lives of protesters, which I can certainly see why people see that as very un-American. Okay, tonight you have been listening to my guests from Yorkshire, Gunderson.
Yes, see ya.
And from stateside, Vil.
See you.
Good night, YouTube. Good night, everyone.